All right, welcome to the Rizzle podcast. Today I have with me, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Taylor Eigsti, and I'm a pianist and composer. And yeah, good to be here talking with you.
Man, yeah, so great to have you on. I really appreciate you doing this. This means the world to like my 18-year-old self. He's kind of like freaking out right now. My 32-year-old self is also freaking out right now, man. So it's great to have you on. I really appreciate this. Um, so yeah, I feel like the past year has probably been pretty momentous for you. It seems like you've been pretty busy. You got a lot going on, not only in your personal life, but in terms of what you've been doing musically. So what does the past year look like for you? What all have you been up to?
Yeah, it's been a fun year. Yeah, professionally, it's been really nice. The most recent album that I recorded, Plot Armor, was lucky to win a Grammy for that at the beginning of the year, and but throughout the year, it's been kind of a combination of playing with some of my favorite people, doing some touring with my own group as well, and expanding my group too, instrumentally and all of that. And yeah, got married a month and a half ago, and so there's been it's been action packed this year for sure.
Extra packed. That's what's up. Yo, so I'm 32 years old and I'm still like a bachelor. I'm still a single man, so I don't really know what it feels like to get married, let alone be in like a long-term like serious relationship, but I also don't know how that would impact me as a businessman or as an artist specifically. But I think there's maybe like a Brian McKnight interview where he talks about how, he was maybe dealing with some writer's block up until he met the one and he got married. And then he said it seemed like there was just, the creative flow was just induced and he just couldn't stop writing. Like his capacity was uninhibited in terms of writing. Do you feel like, taking that next step in your life has had a great impact on your artistry, or how does that reflect in your music?
This is such an interesting question. I think that I think it definitely does affect things. I think each relationship is so different too, and who you're with is so different. Uh, right now, it's really kind of been a mind blowing thing over the last year and a half that I've been with my now wife. Her name's Marta, and she's a virtuosic cellist. She's an incredible cello player, and and it actually took us. We've had a pretty amazing relationship since the very beginning. And we actually met because I was a guest on her podcast. She has a comedy podcast called Gag Economy with her friend Caroline Cassio, where they discuss. They're both heavily working musicians in New York, and so they have people on and they talk about um, crazy stuff that goes on gigs, and what defines a gig or a gag and all of that kind of stuff. Um, and I uh, listened to an interview of a friend of mine, a violist that I worked with a lot with, Terrence Blanchard, and I was cracking up. I loved it, so I was like, "Man, get me on that podcast." And so I went to do that, and we met. That's where we kind of met, and pretty much from that point on, we were pretty inseparable. And it took us probably 3 months, maybe 4 months, I guess, that we actually finally played. Because people, I think, initially thought like, "Oh, you guys must be playing music all the time," but I think there was something about that. I mean, she's so good that it's just, you know, we were both nervous not to. We didn't want to, get months down the line in a great relationship and then all of a sudden mess it all up by playing music together. But it ended up working really, really, really well, and and we immediately had a connection like that. And over this last year, I'd say one of the more significant things for me was playing with her and using her now in my group too. There's always a hesitation. I think if you're in a relationship with another musician, there's a little bit of a hesitation due to you don't want people to think that someone's in the band just because they're married to you, or someone has their girlfriend that they just want her on the road, and so they're like, oh, okay, Gwendolyn is going to sing a couple songs now or something, and everyone's like, oh, jeez, you know. And but I feel like I won the lottery because she's just such an incredible musician. Also, my music happens to have a lot of orchestral elements and that sort of a thing too. So there's a real place for a string instrument within the group, and it works out beautifully. And we had a really great time touring with that now over this year, and a lot more to come. But so for me, it actually gives me more ideas. You know, I could point to a very literal influence of that relationship in my writing, in that, you know, I think she'll murder any other cellist I try to use, and so I have a built-in cello player that I can try things out and have ideas, and I've learned more about the cello as an instrument and how to use it over the last year and a half than I certainly ever have before. And so there is a very direct influence that's pretty literal within the writing process in the case of my particular relationship. But I think some of the more bigger defining elements can be if you are in a relationship with someone. I've been married before as well, and I was married to a someone who was half scientist and half musician too. So that had its own unique positives and challenges and all of that. And then I was in a long 7-year relationship with someone who is in the world of sports. So I'm a huge sports person, and so there was a lot of connection there. But she was more of just a music appreciator, and so sometimes I think inspiration ultimately has to come from you, and it comes from your life. But I think sometimes you get different things when different ideas come to you when you're alone, when you're not in a relationship. Different things come to you where, I think music is supposed to reflect life. So certainly songs, I read a lot of songs that involve lyrics and vocals and things like that too. So there's a lot of stories to be told that kind of directly reflect life. So I think either way, sometimes a very traumatic relationship that has it's like a roller coaster, that can lead to great ideas, story ideas within a song. Being alone can lead to that, for good reasons and for bad reasons. And if you're with another musician, that can have its own thing too. I think it's all different, and one of the challenges with creating music is just the muse is so fleeting either way. So one day you might wake up and just an incredible story comes to you, and a song just comes in like instantaneously. And then sometimes I'll have moments where I'll sit there trying to finish a song, and it's as if like I've never written anything before, and it's so frustrating. And it's like, how in the world do I even go about this? So I think a lot of that can just come from a lot of experience with writing and creating music, knowing how to see if you can bring that muse back at different times, but then using whatever situation you're in, whether it's a long relationship or series of short-term relationships or nothing. It can be equally inspiring. It's just going to be all different.
No, no, I feel like it's really good, and clearly valuable that you guys have that kind of an eclectic dynamic to your relationship. And I could kind of understand what you're saying about being slightly hesitant or feeling some fear involved in kind of sharing a musical experience like that, because music is such a concise means of communicating your emotions that there's completely no hiding. Whatever comes across, excuse me, whatever comes across is going to be like 100%, poignantly, everything you mean, and you won't be able to really hide your feelings, from
Right, and it also has all those elements of, like, on this last tour. It was the first time that Marta had toured in my band, and we were workshopping every night a different way to announce her, because the first handful of gigs that we've done together, I would tell the audience, um, I want to bring out someone who's really special to me. She's an incredible, incredible artist. Fell in love with her album Pieces of the World. She's an unbelievable musician, one of the best musicians in New York City, and also happens to be my wife. Please welcome Marta Bagratuni. So I would kind of try it that way, and the audience likes it. The audience is still, at least initially, they're rooting for all of that because they're like, oh, that's sweet. They're married, and but then, it started to. We were talking. I was talking with Becca Stevens and Marta about this, who were both in the band on the last tour, and she was like, okay, now try saying the part about Marta being your wife like at the end of the show, like when I reintroduce everyone on stage and that sort of a thing. And so then that had its own effect. And then when I finally just was like, not when I finally didn't introduce that at all, and I just let it be, she's in the band, she's a great musician, there it is. That ended up feeling the best for Marta, and Becca kind of agreed with that, like where it's, you don't think usually that most people aren't going to see a show and they see someone and they're like, oh, well, they're just there because they're someone's, they're in a relationship with the band leader. But, some might, and I just wouldn't want, I would always want her to have a fair lens to be seen and heard through, like I would always want people to hear what she's playing through the lens of just she's there because of how great of a musician she is, which she is. Like if she kind of sucked, I wouldn't have her in the band. Maybe I'd set up a special little gig somewhere sometime or something, but it wouldn't be like this. Like this is, she's musically carved out her place within my group and my music, and in a real way that like people in my group like Becca Stevens and Kendrick Scott, and then on this last tour, Zach Grooves on drums and Jonathan Marin, Reggie McNeil. Everyone was just kind of like, oh, this has to be it right now. This is as good as this music has ever sounded, and it's because of what she's adding to it, but I think it was important to kind of workshop different ways of introducing, when I was growing up, I grew up in the Bay Area in California, and I started playing when I was really young. So I started playing when I was 4 years old, and by the time I was 8, I was doing a lot of gigs. And so when you're a kid playing gigs, people will call you a prodigy. So I kind of grew up with that label and that kind of thing. And although I see prodigies now, like on YouTube, and like little, like a 4-month-old in Russia or something that's like zipping around on the piano. I'm like, those are real prodigies. I was just a kid that loved playing, and I had opportunities. I was given opportunities to play. And so I think naturally people call you a prodigy in that kind of a situation. But I am glad that it happened, because I think it's good for any young person to be told by a lot of people that you're good at something at an early age. That gave me the kind of gave me just all sorts of motivation to keep going, and I decided what I wanted to do with my life really young, which I'm really grateful for that. When I was 8 years old, my dad asked me, or I asked my dad, my favorite piano player at the time is a contemporary pianist named David Benoit, and I asked my dad, I was like, how much does David pay each time he gets to perform? He was like, no, he gets paid to do that. And I was like, oh, okay, well then I'll be a musician. So like, it just, to me, it was an easy choice. Although, these days too, like certain tours, it could be an investment. So I actually am paying to play, essentially. But, fundamentally, I'm just really grateful that I knew what I wanted to do early on, and people had faith in me and all that. But at a certain point, then when I was growing as a musician and my career started growing, I got really tired of that label prodigy being attached to things, because I wanted people to hear the music for what it was. Just objectively, where it wasn't like, oh wow, that sounds so good and I'm enjoying that because he's so young, and I think so there's some parallels to that situation in terms of, if you introduce someone on stage as your wife or husband or not. I play with Gretchen Parlato all the time, who's an incredible vocalist, and she's married to Mark Juliana, who's a brilliant drummer, and And I think actually where I met you in LA and stuff, I can't remember if that was the day where both of them were playing or not. But there was 2 nights there. Jonathan Pinson was playing one of the nights, and then the other night was Mark Juliana and Gretchen sat in and all of that. But when I do gigs with Gretchen where Mark's in the band, she actually doesn't introduce him as her husband. And I guess, having at the time had no experience with that kind of thing, I was like, wow, why doesn't she ever introduce him as like, that's my husband right there? And then it just kind of made sense that after now experiencing this, I was always secretly jealous of them because I was like, oh man, I wish I could be in a relationship where we could actually perform together and travel together and all that. But it's nice to be able to play stuff uh, that is judged on the quality of the music alone and doesn't have to be seen through another lens and that sort of a thing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I could relate to that, definitely. I feel like I would hope, and I could assume that the audience would be mature enough to be able to listen to the music without that distraction, or be able to make a concerted effort, you know what I'm saying, to quiet
Right.
their mind in that
Mm-hmm.
regard and just kind of just allow the music to consume the music without having to, you know, I guess like concede to that human tendency to label things, you know what I mean? It's like if I hold this thing up right here and I ask you to not name it, like don't place a name on it,
Mm.
like it's hard because our natural tendency is to want to say this is a phone or this is an iPhone. But when you stop trying to label things, all of a sudden it's like a sonar communication device and it has internet and it has these computer chips inside. You start to break things down to
Yeah.
their, more natural elements, which I think music and sound, especially jazz, is more so based in, not naming things at first, maybe.
Yeah,
But
if I didn't know the word for what you just held up, then I'd start thinking of what it does and try to
yeah,
define it from that standpoint. Yeah.
definitely. But yeah, it sounds like you got a really healthy approach, to your relationship, and I envy that. I think like my most successful relationships and the relationships that I've been most spoiled and understood in have been relationships with with ladies that have, played instruments at the very least. And I think it's really interesting that you guys kind of met or like the influence of the medium of comedy as well because I feel like comedy and jazz are like highly related in the way that jazz and comedy both kind of shape their narratives, and we both kind of have this concept of tension and release that are, a prominent theme, in both mediums. So really, really cool, man. Congratulations, man.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I like that comparison too. I think there's such a world of similarities in the comedy world and music and all that. And for us, it was a good opportunity to kind of we realized that we had a very symbiotic sense of humor collectively between the two of us, which led to all sorts of led to the rest of the stuff. But then it is kind of amazing too, where I think when people play music together, they're very much. If you're playing honest music, then you're really playing your personality.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times people who get along really well, then they play music together. It's no surprise when that can really end up working. So
Mhm. I don't want to go off on a tangent right now because I wanted to ask you about, I wanted to stay on the topic of relationships and ask you more about you expanding your group. And then I wanted to ask you about some of the beginnings of I won't call it a clique, but maybe some like reoccurring characters within either music that you're featured in or your own music and how those relationships first came to be. And maybe just like what the dynamics, excuse me, of those relationships are like now. But yeah, that's one thing I've noticed about your music specifically is that you don't polarize your personality and like your personality off the piano and your personality on the piano. Like the two are like like highly assimilated, And I think some artists tend to kind of have like a duplicity or polarity between who they are outside of music and who they are when they're playing, but yours are just synonymous. Is that intentional or is that something that you kind of observed within yourself?
Well, I think my favorite music is really honest music. There's a lot of my favorite vocalists, for instance, are people who their speaking voice pretty similar to when they start singing and stuff. And I like it when those worlds, I just you can detect you can usually detect music that's not fully honest music right away. And for me, I try to I've always had a I growing up throughout my life, there's been just a lot of tragedy, and like my entire immediate family no longer exists, and all of that, and I always view it as every time I have a chance to play music, I like to kind of go and dive for it a little bit and treat it as if it's doesn't matter where it is, but I try to treat it like it's the last opportunity to play music. And there's an abundance of examples left and right throughout the years where you just never know, and it is the last time, so to me, it's always important that if we have an opportunity to play music and perform, um, having I keep that kind of it's very sacred to me, like where I want it to be. Um, if you're always aware that it could be the last time that you ever get to play music, then wouldn't you want to be as honest as possible and be yourself, and I think one important part to that is surrounding yourself with musicians that enable you to be yourself, and I have to personally connect with them too. There's people that I choose to play with, are people that I get along with, and if there's ever situations where stop getting along with someone or whatever, then it's not, to me, it's I'm not going to be able to be myself and make music like as if I'm myself. And so I think that you mentioned there's different characters that come in and out of my music and collaborators and all of that. I think there's certain people like Becca Stevens is a great example of that. She's one of my greatest friends. I've known her for 2 decades, been playing music with her for 2 decades, um, and I feel very much myself around her. I feel extremely like myself around Gretchen Parlato too. So those two people, I like. I don't think I'm ever gonna stop playing with them, both with their thing and my thing. I like a combination of my records, especially the last like 2 and 3 albums, have been kind of a reflection of my friends and my life and things like that. And I like to involve those friends in what I'm doing. And there's kind of a pretty close Venn diagram of my best friends in life being some of the people that I love making music with the most. So it just makes sense to I view that as like I want to still be playing with the people that I'm playing with, and more, and all of that, and creating more. But until I die, this is like the people that I love the most as musicians and people. I still want to be playing with them, and I'm not. I think I tacked on a tangent to a tangent there, but yeah, I'm really lucky that I have that community and stuff. That is really kind of especially in times. I mentioned that I mean, my sister died when I was 3, and she was a jazz and rock pianist. She was one of the biggest reasons why I started playing music. And my dad passed away when I was 12. My mom last year. There was a period of time too where I was very, very alone in life, and but those people that I consider, I was really put face to face with the idea of like friends are the family that you choose. Friends being actually my only family. At a certain point, became really real, and they had my back during those times. And so musically, it's just kind of like one of those things where you can it's so much easier to play with someone that that you trust them as a human being, and when that trust is there as a human being, then it's so easy to play with someone musically, and because it's all of the nuances, it's all in the details, it's all the subtleties and predicting what someone's going to do, and that sort of a thing. And I look at like comping when I'm playing behind someone else taking a solo or playing. the ways that you can predict what someone might say, or stay out of the way of it in a certain way. It's social, so if you're hanging out with one of your friends, and I I think we all have friends that like we like having them around, because everyone has at least a few friends that laugh at the right times, like people where you're like, I love just being in a conversation with them, because they just bring out what everyone else is doing, and so there's a lot of parallels to that in music too, being able to um, support someone, not get in their way, offer some ideas here and there, and it's an exchange. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely, definitely an exchange. Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah, like I think unfortunately tragic moments like that in life tend to dissolve the deception, of the not only the people around you, but just the world in general. But it
Right.
seems like your approach, like of course there's always going to be things that we regret in life, but your approach seems to minimize regret in terms of being honest with those people around you, and also seeing every moment, especially every moment in music, as it could be your last. So
Right.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you
Uh,
definitely play with some of my favorite figures in jazz. You've been featured with the Kendrick Scott Oracle, Gretchen Parlato, yeah, all these different names, Charles Altura, Mike Moreno. How did you first meet these guys?
well, I guess every one of those musicians that you mentioned kind of have their own different story there as to how I met them. I would say that the majority of people that I still play with all the time, a lot of that happened when, so out of high school, I went to USC for a year and a half, and I lived in LA for about 4 years. And the people who I was at USC with, or just in LA with at the same time that they were, really formed kind of like a big um, group of friends in a lot of ways and stuff. So I was, my class when I was at USC, it was the piano players were myself, Gerald Clayton, who Gerald's still one of my best friends, and me, Gerald Clayton, Eldar Jangirov, who's an amazing pianist, Tigran Hamasyan, and actually there's a great pianist that was there at the time, Mahesh Balasuriya too. And so just even on the piano class, there was just, there was a lot of people that we all still regularly communicate, but people like Harish Raghavan and Joe Sanders and Gretchen Parlato and all those kind of people, we were all living in LA at the same time. And Ben Wendell, Nate Wood, just it's such a vast list that I still play with all of these people to this day, more than 23 years later or whatever. And it's it's a beautiful thing to know that there's some people that you meet where you're like, oh, whoa, I'm going to be playing with them for like the next 23 years. It's kind of deep, like to just look at that. But I think a lot of those people, I met, uh, I met Kendrick at the Monterey Jazz Festival, probably in 2004, maybe something like that. And we were all hanging out after, like we knew of each other and that sort of thing, and but we were hanging out deep into the night in Monterey, and we were all hanging out back at my room there at the hotel that they put everyone up at Monterey, and he left this hilarious and incredibly inappropriate note on a table in my room, and I'm like, the hell is this? And I read this, and from that point on, I was like, that's gonna be one of my best friends right there. And it was, I mean, it was so funny. I mean, I probably shouldn't share it on your podcast, but I'm like, it really, I think again, it's a good example of a sense of humor connecting right away, and that led to everything else. And then we started to find ourselves on the same gigs, and he put me in his band called Oracle, and then I've used him in my band to this day. We all the time are on different tours in different bands. Like we were talking about this in Europe a couple weeks ago. I ran into Kendrick and Joe Sanders, who they were there at this club in Hamburg the day before my band was playing there. And me and Kendrick were reminiscing about the fact that like we've probably the two of us have toured with more people together. I've been to Japan 39 times, and I think Kendrick's been involved at least 25 of those times, you know. So it's one of those things where we then just kind of like we really hit it off, and then life had a way of putting us in situations where we were always on the same gigs, sometimes of our own design and sometimes just because that just happened. And Gretchen was someone that I knew from LA, and all of that, but we really started playing together in New York in around 2007. I introduced her to Becca Stevens. So like I wrote to Becca and I was like, "Hey, Becca, I'm a big fan of your music." I wrote to her on MySpace, and I said I'd love to have coffee with you and my friend Gretchen Parlato to see if there, you know, like I have these ideas of some songs that I envision both of you singing together and all of that. And we went out and we all hit it off. We were laughing our asses off. We ended up, we met up at like noon to go grab coffee or something, the three of us, and then we ended up hanging until like 4 in the morning or something. And then just, another example of like a sense of humor and a sense of personal relationship, like immediately leading to a musical thing and all of that. But I'm trying to remember some of the other ones that you mentioned. Guitar players like Charles Altura. I've played with Charles since I was 11 years old. He grew up in the Bay Area like I did, and the first combo I was in when I was a student at Stanford Jazz Workshop. I was 11. It was myself, Thomas Pridgeon on drums, who was one of my closest friends during that time. He's a crazy person, and I love him to death. And I think he's brilliant. He's one of the best. I'll die on the hill of he's one of, if not greatest drummer in the world. I mean, he's just he's incredible. And but yeah, it was like 11-year-old Thomas Pridgeon, myself, Ambrose Akinmusri on trumpet, Dana Stevens, Charles Altura, and it was kind of funny how consistent everyone's personality and to some degree has been since then too. And Mike Moreno I met after I moved to New York, and I knew his music and all of that, and then we became good friends and started playing in a lot of different groups together and that sort of thing. And and it's one of those things where it's always a different situation. Sometimes whenever I'm playing with any of those people, it could be in their group, it could be in my group. It's a very like close knit community where we sometimes we'll do a gig, maybe it's 4 or 5 of us, and we're all band leaders, and we're all like everyone has played in everyone else's band at that point, and that sort of a thing. So it kind of just naturally builds over time, and it takes some time to kind of build that too. And sometimes I think for anyone who is having a hard time with that initially, being really proactive with that is a big thing. And there's a former student of mine and one of my great friends. He's a great pianist, James Francis, and he right when he had moved to New York, like I would talk to him, and he was like, man, no one's calling me for gigs and stuff. And I just told him, I was like, just start almost annoying people with your presence. Like start letting people know you exist. I'm like, no one's going to call you for stuff if they don't know you exist. So James I always use him as an example of like, he was so proactively like present. He would go to every show. He would always talk to people afterwards. He would call people. He would make himself known. And as a result, now people know him. Now people call him for things, book him for things. They know what he does because he had to expand his community. And sometimes that can be a very intentional thing. There's a drummer that lives in New York. He's young dude, but very mature beyond his years, very experienced, plays a lot in Wynton Marsalis's group and a lot of other groups now. His name is Damo Branch. I actually played with him in LA a few times ago when I did like a trio gig there, with Ben Williams. I brought Damo out, but Damo, I met at like a jazz camp at one point, and I gave him my phone number because we were going to meet up for, we were probably trying to set up a basketball game or something. And but then after that camp, he would send me like one text every month, and it would just be like a video of him playing drums, you know. And I'm like, okay, okay, cool. And I kind of wouldn't do anything with that text. And then I'd get, you know, next month it'd be like another text from Damo, like another video of him playing. And, you know, once in a while, I guess I would reply like, nice, man. You know, because I'm like, what do I really do? How do I, okay, cool. You play the drums. I got it. And then he kept doing it and kept doing it. And then eventually I had a gig where the drummer that I had backed out last second, and I was like, wait a minute, let me look at this video again. And so I just watched, and I was like, oh, I'm like, you know what? Let's see. So I called him up, flew him out for the gig, and he came in and killed it, you know. And if he hadn't put himself out there and continuously reached out, like it wouldn't have been in the front of my brain even as a possibility. Like sometimes people won't hire someone for a gig because they forget that they exist. They forget that they live in a certain place, or they, you know, any of that. So any kind of like putting yourself out there and reaching out and making people aware that you exist, I think is like leads to so much good things, way more good than bad, you know. The worst thing that anyone could say is like, oh man, they're always around. Okay, cool. Well, then you did your job. Like that's exactly what it should be, you know. And sometimes when you're playing with a lot of people, there's a nice element of word of mouth too, like where everyone's like, oh, you should call so and so, you should call so and so. So yeah, that's just a bunch of thoughts about that whole world of community and you know, and people that are aware of each other. You know, I think that's the biggest thing, and I think that's why a lot of people who meet in college too, or around that time, you know, you end up playing with those people for a long time usually because. If you're always on campus with each other or going to classes together, you're aware of each other, you know. So the first step is just awareness, you know.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely like that's how it's done, you know, networking and
Yeah,
even like an element of maybe sales or just like being present and getting yourself out there. That's
absolutely.
definitely how it's done. That surprises me what you said about James Francis because I know him as being featured on what show is it with the Roots? Is that Jimmy Fallon, The Tonight Show?
Could have been, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
oh yeah, right. Well, he subbed for James Poyser quite a few
yeah.
times over the years, and all of that, and you know. But that's the thing, like people, you know, once someone like James Poyser is aware of you, then great things can lead from that, you know. And then the next thing you know, then you're doing shows that, you know, with Common or something else or whatever. And there's a lot of different things that, but I'm very proud of James because he's someone that I've known him since he was like 14 or 15, and I remember driving him around in my car. We went to go get really good Mexican food, and I was like, stop the car, and I was like, I made him get his United number, Delta number, and American number. And I'm like, I'm not starting this car until you get all three. And now he's as much of a flight nerd as I am and stuff. So, you know, I now James is the guy that he's like, you know, he's laying flat in business class while everyone is back there, you know, fighting over like stale food and stuff, because he put the time into. I was like, you're going to be traveling a lot, you know, so you got to care about these things so that it makes your life more comfortable, and more survivable, a life of like heavy touring and all that. But yeah, he was someone that I've believed in him for a long time, but he's great, you know, and he did everything the right way, and so it's so satisfying, you know, watching his career grow and to the point where he's at now and stuff, where everyone knows him, you know. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, definitely. Like, look at that. He went from complaining about not having any gigs to maybe being concerned about, just staying comfortable in first class and being featured as a sub for James Poyser on the Tonight Show or with the Roots. That's a
Yeah.
great success story. Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
one
You know,
way.
and there's been a lot of people over time that I got to say that I'm so unbelievably proud of. There's another great pianist named Paul Cornish, who was a student of mine that he's gone on to some incredible, incredible things, and he just released a new album. And but he grew as a musician like 100 times what the musician he was when he was 15. And he's another example of someone who did everything the right way, and now he's like on tour with Joshua Redman and just doing all sorts of amazing things. But people can get really caught up in the present moment. Like if there's like, oh, no one is calling me for gigs, I'm not getting any gigs, that kind of a thing. Sometimes it's awareness. They got to be aware of you, and the situation's got to be right. And then you kind of have to just really put yourself out there and let the quantity and let the reps do their thing and stuff, and all of that. But if people are very closed off, it's very, very hard to find a lot of work. It's interesting because there's a lot of introverted people in music, but that can be one of the biggest challenges for someone like that, is to be able to put yourself out there and make people aware of you and that sort of a thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like as jazz musicians, you guys are mostly concerned about being in tune with your emotions, but in a networking and business sense, sometimes that can get in one's way because, your emotions can be telling you one story that is not really consistent with reality. So I think we kind of have to have somebody to keep us in check, maybe, someone to kind of say, yeah, you feel that way, but that's not actually the way it works, you know? But yeah, I
Right.
think I've spent a little bit of time brushing shoulders with people in the hip hop world. And from what you're telling me, it's kind of like very contrasting cultures in terms of community, because I feel like even though hip hop has a very prominent community globally, within rappers and the way they work together is much more isolated, like here in the United States locally. Like, I feel like rappers might be on stage together, but after that, that's it. They go to their separate inhabitants and they don't really talk to each other after that. Like it's much more individualistic and isolated. But I kind of liken it to, from what you're telling me, like today's NBA. Like those are kind of the way rappers kind of communicate and like the 90s powerhouses of the nine in the NBA, because like jazz musicians have the team chemistry and consistency and star power to be able to, quote unquote, like dominate or have a reign for years at a time. Whereas like in today's NBA, just like rappers, they come in and out because there's not really, I think part of it is because they lack like powerhouses like the Wu-Tang Clan of the 90s, or like groups that used to stick together and kind of feed each other, over the course of years. Because like yeah, I feel like today's NBA is so much more a la carte. Like you'll have one star on the Lakers for 1 year, and the Lakers will do great that year, maybe make the postseason. But then the next season, there's a bunch of trades, and all of a sudden, the Lakers are just, rebuilding in a rebuilding year or something like that. So yeah, I definitely see the value of team chemistry and getting to know each other off the court, in jazz music. That is really, really yeah, which is creates sustenance, within the art form, and uh,
Yeah, I mean, I completely see those parallels. I mean, it's interesting that you bring that kind of stuff up because I think in sports analogies constantly. And I mean, the only thing that I would have done outside of being a musician is football coach. And I did some coaching, and when I was in high school, and I coached basketball as well and stuff. And it seems like, yeah, I hear you with the a la carte is a perfect way to describe it. There's a lot of just free agent every team. It's hard to used to be, there'd be like you'd look at a particular athlete and like, wow, they're on the Utah Jazz, and they're like always on the Utah Jazz. And now it's just a lot of free agent three point shooters and things like that. And yeah, but when you have the chance to build a team and build the chemistry. I mean, now, I mean, I've had the luxury. I never thought I would call it say that, but I've had the luxury of being a Warriors fan my whole life. And so when we, enjoyed what we enjoyed over the last handful of years, I think largely it's, you could look at, there's at least some element of that chemistry stayed intact. At least there's Draymond and Steph, and for the majority of that, Clay as well. But, you know, it was, and we won the first one without KD. So we did, that was more like you got a new, but even that, like, we stayed together as that unit for a couple years at least. But yeah, I mean, I think that kind of stuff. Also, even within individual tours, you could think of those as like specific seasons too. I always like how in longer tours, 3-4 week long tours with a certain band, the music will just have a chance to expand and change and grow. And it's really satisfying having the opportunity of to do that with my own music now. Over the last several years, when I've started doing more band leader tours again, because I would get jealous over my friends, and I'd be in their band, and we'd like, man, this music is at a whole other place 2 weeks into the tour. And but it's cool how, and it's all shaped by chemistry and stuff. And good band leading is the same as good coaching, in the sense of it's really, really important maximizing who people are and letting them bring out what they do the best. I think when people feel stifled and all of that, that can really hinder the development and the possibilities. But I've had the luxury of being around really good band leaders and learning from them, and learning in a lot of cases too what not to do. I've gotten just as much good information from that too. But yeah, have you do you know Terrace Martin?
I'm a huge fan of Terrace Martin.
Yeah, definitely. You guys should have a conversation, because he would be able to shed so much light on a lot of that world too, that he's constantly involved in, within the hip hop scene and things like that and everything. And both you are in L.A. too, so. But Terrace is such an amazing musical mind, and I've always had a really nice personal connection with him too. He's is beautiful guy. I like the way he thinks, and he's certainly brilliant. But I'm sure you guys would have a good conversation too, because you ask really interesting questions that, knowing Terrace too, I know that he would expand on a lot of those things, but particularly in that world as well too.
Okay, yeah, thanks for bridging that gap. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
I'll
for
look into
sure.
that.
Yeah.
Speaking of bridging gaps between genres, I feel like there's kind of a riff or a divide between reverence to the traditional language in jazz. Like I feel like there are some jazz artists that are really, really, for lack of better terms, conservative in terms of their reverence to the jazz idiom and idiosyncrasies of the, 50s, 60s on forward. And then there are a lot of jazz artists in modern day who grew up listening to, pop radio or rock or hip hop, and try to combine these elements and maybe try to quote unquote push the genre forward towards the future. I feel like you specifically have a lot of pop appeal and a lot more than most jazz artists. So I wanted to know, like, who are some of your influences from the pop vein? Because I feel like for me, what relates between jazz and pop is this reverence again to aesthetics. Like I feel like pop can kind of be heavily reverent towards more of a visual aesthetic sometimes instead of the music. And I feel like jazz is heavily reverent towards the aesthetic of sound and the music itself. But I think they're kind of synonymous or like invertedly equal, at the end of the day. And honestly, I feel like jazz and pop are kind of equally narcissistic, but they're also equally as empathetic,
Hmm.
towards their audience.
Hmm.
So who are some of your maybe earlier pop influences that you feel like have kind of had an impact on the way that you play?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I guess for me, it's been less specifically individual. I think there's a part of me that's always wanted to play music that doesn't subscribe to a particular set of rules in a way. And so some of those people now, I'll preface all this by saying there's a place for everyone. So if if people want to play music that's largely um, trying to achieve kind of like more of a traditional approach, 50s, 60s, bebop, you know, any avenue of jazz music, that's great. Where my heart has always been, even when I was like a kid and I would be in school and we'd get a school schedule, I'm like, this doesn't work for me. I would always have to like be on my own schedule if I'm making a recipe or if I'm cooking. I couldn't use a recipe. I'm like I'm like I want to put the shit in it that I want to put in. And so musically I've always been the most inspired by artists that kind of combine stuff. So I mentioned David Benoit earlier. He's a great piano player that I would watch him do shows with the San Francisco Symphony and things like that. So I would be inspired by seeing this combination of like jazz and classical music, for instance. Then artists like Bjork, where they really carve out their own thing, but she's using, what type of music is it when you're using an 80-person all female brass orchestra, and then you invented an instrument that week that you have on stage, and then there's samples by two people are live sampling a live stream of a liposuction, and so they're making a beat out of fat sucking sounds. Like there would be things like that where I'm like, for me, Bjork was pretty high up on the list of just people that would do things that the way that she wanted to do it that were very different and unique, and they were a combination of things. And I've always been drawn to things that were harder to compare and define. So for me, it's never I just want to make the music as good as it possibly can get. But I also like it that I like having the opportunity to do something that's less easy to compare. I think sometimes an audience will like things frequently because their first entryway into someone's music can be referential. So, like you listen to someone and you're like, oh man, they sound just like Bill Evans or something, and that's their entryway. Or you hear a pop person and like, wow, it really sounds like the Strokes meet blah blah blah. Like, people they do references first. They find similarities to things, and then that's sometimes why people like things, because they like the things they're referring to. And it can be harder from a marketing perspective, certainly, but sometimes challenging on an audience to hear something that you haven't heard before that's new and different and original. I mean, it's interesting. I didn't watch all of it, but the other night, once in a blue moon, I'll watch a little bit of Saturday Night Live. I think some of the writing sucks these days, but it like a lot. But I caught a few minutes of it the other night, and I went to the musical act, which to a lot of times I watch the musical act on SNL, and it's like someone kind of playing music with the same chord changes as every other pop tune, and they got a backing track, and it's just not, a lot of times I'm not into it. There's an artist named Dijon, and I'd never heard him before at all. And but I thought it was so interesting because he had all these live musicians on stage. He had like something like 8 guitar players and 3 keyboard players and some background vocalists that were just singing single words here and there once in a blue moon. And it felt like they were making something that was would have been a very layered in studio production live in person on stage. And I was like immediately like, whoa, I like this, whatever this is, because it's different, because it's harder to define. I was like, what even kind of music is this? Like, it's just and so that's my happy place. It's a lot harder to market, sometimes, unless you have a machine behind stuff, a money machine dictating like we are sending this to people now, because otherwise, I'm in a situation all the time where, I make the music that I make, and I like being kind of genre non-specific. I mean, my music operates with the same mechanical things that jazz music does, but it doesn't always, and certainly I find myself in all sorts of situations just playing straight ahead jazz sometimes too. So, but whatever subgenre of stuff my stuff fits into, it's hard not for it not to sound like jazz when I just play in a trio context or something. But usually, if I have 6, 7 people with me, it might be drawing more influences out of pop and R&B and all of that, but they wouldn't be necessarily direct influences of specific artists. It would just be making the song and letting it be what it is, and then the comparisons can be drawn afterwards wherever someone's going to find their entry point. It sometimes in the same situation of like if you're writing a tune that just happens to be in an odd time signature, and but that's just where it lives, versus going about writing a song and being like, okay, I'm going to write this tune in 11 and I want this song to be in 11. It just kind of forces it, but so I like to let the stuff kind of just be what it is, and then people can find their own comparisons. But on a marketing level, it can be very, if I went out and did a trio record where, God bless him, but like, okay, tribute to Oscar Peterson or something like that, be super easy to tour with that. Like easy to get long tours, bookings at every concert hall. Everyone can market it. Tribute things are pretty easy to market things. It's low hanging fruit. If so and so does a tribute to Duke Ellington, a lot of people love Duke Ellington, so here we go. Here's a full tour for you. But when you have someone writing music that sounds like it's in between a lot of different things, then the people on the marketing side, they're like, how do we even get people to come hear this and stuff? And that's where the machine comes in handy. The big music industry machine that decides, if they decide like this is the music we're gonna give to people and feed them, people will listen to that. They'll eat whatever is served on the plate. But if you want people to come into it on their own terms, sometimes that referential nature is very useful. But it's not where my heart is. My heart is if anything, it's a combination of probably over 1,000 different artists and their music that have influenced me in different ways that just kind of start to get assimilated into the music in various ways. I didn't grow up being a transcriber, so I've transcribed maybe 6 single choruses of people's solos in my life, and some people learn the music that way, but I always was like, I think where we start to sound I think where we start to have a unique individual sound is where we fail in emulating others, and so I've always been like, well, you could try as hard as you want. You're never going to sound like all of these other great musicians that I love, So I'd rather just love all of their music, see what I can do to capture the parts of their energy that I love, put it into something, and then allow the music to come out and be guided by that energy, as opposed to being guided by specific phrases or something that I could reference or that sort of thing. So I'm very my intent is always to be non-referential. However, like where if someone says, "Oh, I saw that you quoted that tune in that tune," no, I didn't, not intentionally. If I did, it just happened to be a series of notes that probably sounded similar. But it just, for me, I'm that's one of the kind of things that enables me to operate in an honest way, is to like not be too referential and stuff like that. So even when I'm describing my music to bandmates, like maybe in a rehearsal, there's some people that will be like, oh, this is kind of like, just think like, okay, this is kind of like Wynton Kelly here, and then kind of just, this section is more Herbie Hancock, or this section, I'm like, I could never think that way. It's just not how I would want people to, if I wanted someone else to sound like something else specifically, I probably would have just called someone else, and so I like calling people to play music to be themselves and bring themselves to it, and however so I don't like being referential in that sense, but I think there's certainly a lot of influences that are subconsciously embedded in there and things like that, but it would never be like an intentional reference. um it's interesting that you mentioned that in pop music there'd be this emphasis on the visual side of things. I also feel like less I feel just as uncomfortable with that world as I do the world of being like a jazz traditionalist and stuff. It's interesting. I just did a week of the Blue Note with Corey Wong, who's an incredible guitarist. He's kind of achieved this like superstardom these days and stuff, where he's headlining a lot of stadiums and arenas and all of that. It was an amazing time that week. Like we had Joshua Redman with us, Kenny Garrett, and the whole band was just phenomenal musicians. Corey's great. His music is awesome. He sent a text around halfway through the week reminding the band not to wear patterns because he wanted no visual dissonance on stage, and he wanted us to just wear our solid black shirts or whatever. And you know, I, I get it. He's more in the pop visual world. If you're used to playing stadiums all the time, sure. Sometimes he has a version of his group where people are wearing jumpsuits, matching jumpsuits and stuff, and that's he's not the only one who does that. There's like Snarky Puppy will do that at times. Like there's all sorts of different people in kind of like a modern funk world that do that kind of a thing. I was a little bit like it's just not something I'm used to and stuff. But I'm like, that's cool. I'll wear my black shirt. It's starting to smell on day 4 here, but I'll wear I'll wear it. But I was less used to that. But it was an interesting reminder that of like what you're saying, where there is certainly a visual intent that comes into the bop world and stuff at a certain level and all that. And if it was anyone other than Corey, I would have been like, fuck out of here with your black shirt. I wear what I want to wear, but I was like, all right, it's Corey, it's okay. So, I think that comment, I think I've always just tried to live in some sort of combination world, where I want to pick the stuff from every little situation that I like and put it together, and then become a nightmare for anyone trying to market it, because I think what I'm most proud of about my music is it does sound like itself. I think it doesn't sound a tremendous amount, like other music, but a lot of my contemporaries and peers, like are achieve that their own way too. People that I'm the most drawn to. And a good example of someone who carved their own thing out and is a much deeper artist than a lot of people even give credit, because they'll take the low hanging fruit of just the combination between like jazz and hip hop and all that kind of stuff. But Robert Glasper has been a friend of mine for almost like 2 decades actually, and he's like, when I moved to New York, I think maybe around the same time that he did and all of that. And but I remember hanging with him in like 2005 and things like that, where he had just started to kind of do something to combine those two worlds. Obviously, he's gone on to like, make a pretty historic impact in how those two worlds can communicate and operate together. It's basically, him, not just him, but he's left a specifically large impact in how those worlds can combine. But he was one of the first to really do that successfully in a lot of ways. And but harmonically, as a pianist and things like that, he's a lot deeper than people. They just take the low hanging fruit, of that sort of thing. And I really deeply know his music, and I love it. And so I'm just as inspired by people like Robert or Gerald or Aaron Parks, or like other people pianists that are in my general age range that are doing this at the same time. But I like the ones that do something different. Like those 3 that I mentioned are 3 of my all-time favorites, because the way that Robert, the way that his approach is, the way that Aaron Parks' approach is, which is very like cinematic, and it's music that is emotional. It finds a groove. It finds it grabs the listener and takes them somewhere and doesn't leave them behind, but also doesn't worry about too much about like not trying to surprise them and things, you know. So yeah, that's a big long tangent, bunch of tangents, but I guess that's in a way indicative of I like to combine a lot of stuff together.
Well, no, yeah, thanks for sharing. We only got a couple more minutes, want to start to wrap it up. I got a couple more questions and points for you, but man, exactly. Yeah, Robert Glasper is one of my favorite artists, and he released like 3 albums in 2025, and all of them were kind of contrasting on like almost on opposite sides of the spectrum, between like hip hop, I guess, or hip hop combined with jazz, and then like the more traditional, just swinging jazz. And his harmonic concept is incredibly satisfying to listen to the tension and release points of his music. It's just incredible.
Yeah, and one of my favorite things about Robert's music is, you know, if you had to describe Robert to someone in like with one sentence or something, it'd be crazy hard to do that, you know, because there's so many avenues and there's so many things that he does and there's so many he's just as brilliant playing in a just straight ahead trio as he is in a, you know, he's like someone that when he takes over the Blue Note for a month, he really takes advantage of how different you can get from day to day of like a full month where, you know, maybe there's D'Ambrosio on one day and then Kim Burrell on another day and then a jazz trio on one day that gets really out and then, you know, something else and something else. And it's very inspiring to be around, you know, and I'm lucky that I get to be around people like that. And I've also spent some time with Robert in the studio as well, like with Gretchen Parlato. I think she's actually working on a new thing with him too. But he produced an album called Lost and Found that we did, and but just you know, I like he's just yeah, it's a brilliant mind. So yeah.
Definitely. So as far as your discography is concerned, I feel like, yeah, early on, I feel like me personally, as I was listening to your first 2 albums, I felt like the first album, I could definitely hear that you had your own concept. You definitely had a distinct melodic concept. But it seemed like the second album is when your rhythmic and your phrasing concept started to kind of link in with the melodic, and harmonic concepts. And it seemed
I'm
like from that
I'm
second album
curious which
forward.
albums those were. There's been 9 of them, so there's but it may be
Okay.
you may be referencing some of the later albums and stuff because my first album I can't I, that I can't I mean I can't listen to that. I was yeah, it was an album called Tay's Groove that I did with Dan Brubeck and Seward McCain, and it was certainly was not. I would say there was zero concept of just about anything then. Dan sounded great, Seward sounded good, but there was then there was a live trio album called Live at Filoli that I did. Then an album I made for a Japanese record label called Taylor's Dream. They named it, I didn't. And then I did an album called Resonance on a label called Bop City. There was then I think after Resonance was Lucky to Be Me, which Lucky to Be Me that was on Concord Records, and they gave me a nice budget to be able to use some interesting musicians that I really had wanted to work with, like Christian McBride and all of that, but yeah, I think where I started to find my heart a little bit was an album called Let It Come to You. That was the second album that I did on Concord, and that was kind of to me the precursor of a lot of stuff that I'm doing now. Where it was more personal, and it was more. I got to do more unique things and all of that, and of course that's the one that the label like really didn't care about. And they wanted to resequence the thing. They Concord wanted a young little straight ahead jazz pianist. That's what they signed up for, and I didn't want to be limited by that and stuff. There's several tunes on that record that I had to go back in and record after the album was already done because they wanted more jazz trio stuff on it and everything. And I'm like, you're missing the point. I had a 3-part suite on that called Fallback Plan that I wanted to divide up throughout the course of the record, so it was kind of a cinematic thread that people could come in and out of that suite throughout the record. They didn't want that, so they put all of those together towards the end of the record because they were like, they actually wanted to cut that entire suite. They wanted it off the record, and that was the moment where I was like, very inclined to leave that record label because I didn't like being told that at all, and I felt like they botched the sequence of that record, and but it's still got a special place in my heart because that was the beginning of where I found myself as a really found myself as the identity that I have as a musician started to come out on Let It Come to You. Lucky to Be Me was me playing standards and some originals and all of that with, it's a fun record, but um I think where my heart was in it was Let It Come to You. There's a record that I did called Daylight at Midnight that then was that was kind of a product of the mind of Matt Pearson. Matt Pearson produced all of Brad Meldau's Art of the Trio records, and he's a good producer and all this kind of stuff. And he gave me a big list of tunes he thought that I might like, and I wanted to really heavily integrate Becca into a record. The record that I wanted to make before Daylight at Midnight was an album with Becca and Gretchen. I wanted to essentially make Tree Falls at that point, and that was back in 2009. I already wanted to make Tree Falls. I wanted to make this stuff then, and but everyone just they told me no, you should really do covers of stuff, and I'm like, okay, fine. So we did, on Daylight at Midnight, like there's a lot of really fun, what ended up being fun covers of things and all that, and uh yeah, that same producer too, before I think it was 2018, 2017, had a conversation, went out to lunch, and I said, I want to do an album of, basically all just my original music. And he was like, oh, that'll never work. He's like, unless those tunes were really, really good or something. And I was like, challenge accepted, and so that's what led me to making Tree Falls right at that point. It was pretty much like a revenge record where I wanted to prove something of just like, well, this music is good enough, thank you very much. And so now Tree Falls and Plot Armor are kind of the first two of a series of three bigger records of kind of mostly my original music that I want to make. And then I'm going to do a solo piano album, symphony album, other kind of stuff after that. But I see Tree Falls and Plot Armor as kind of part of a trilogy in a way, which makes my life a pain in the ass because the record that I'm currently working on, that's the follow up to those two, is it's not going to be easy. It's going to take me a while, and I can't envision this coming out before like late 2027 at the very earliest. But but it's interesting how each one of those moments can kind of represent something different. But yeah, Let It Come to You was the record where I felt unlocked everything else for me, because it was the only time where I felt like I almost got away with something. And whereas all of these other kind of, and the only way to make the last two records that I made was to be with record labels that didn't tell me what to do. Like they gave me musical freedom. So Tree Falls was with GSI Records, where that was built into the contract. You can't tell me what to do. and then Plot Armor was released on Ground Up, which is Snarky Puppy's record label, that they basically said, do what you want to do. We trust you. Just deliver it to us by this date. And there you go. And so, but I think that in my experience, the less a record label tells people what to play and how to play it, the better the music is, always, 100% of the time. And let your artists be themselves, and if you don't want them to be, don't sign them. So but yeah, I don't know, I just kind of jumped in there and took that to a tangent of that. But there, you had mentioned the first album or second album. I'm like, there was quite a few, but early on that were, me as a teenager, and no one deserves that. No one deserves to hear that.
Don't be
It's
embarrassed, But I was just listening off of Spotify. So yeah, it was
mm,
Lucky to Be Me was the first one I listened to. It says on here, it says 2006. And then yeah, the
mm,
one where I felt like, as you had said, the one where I felt like, all right, that's the present day Taylor Eggsty. I was Let It Come to You. So yeah,
yeah, for
definitely.
sure.
I got a
Yeah.
couple more points for you, then I'll let you go. Yeah, I wanted to go back though and mention, yeah, you were talking about novelty. And I feel like, yeah, that's the thing, is that at this point in history, it can feel like we've exhausted all all further possibilities or all further permutations, of certain art forms or of certain lineages of languages. But yeah, like that's what people pay attention to. That's what makes you stop and say, what is that? It's novelty in music. So I feel like, yeah, I have a thirst for novelty as well. And I hope that people like you continue to push the envelope forward and give people like me something to listen to, something new to listen to. All right, let's
For
go ahead and
sure.
start wrapping it up.
Oh, let me just expand on that for two
Yeah, yeah.
seconds. One thing that I always like mentioning is that when during COVID, I remember I was like, man, are there going to ever be tours again? Are there going to be concerts again? Like it was just all a big unknown. But then I'm like, how in the world? I feel like maybe that's it for music. I'm like, that's about as much the genres that we have. Like now, that's where it's gonna. Because everyone during COVID, I would watch people's live streams, and it's like a bunch of people playing F7 funk vamps and stuff, and I'm like, okay, so music's dead. But then what I started to think was, I was like, wait a minute, the last pandemic, 1918, all of the music that we can think of that is music, all of the genres that came after the last pandemic. So it was that gave me some hope where I was like, wow, maybe after this there's going to be like 2.0 of like, now a whole bunch of new genres and things. And so I have a lot of hope that all of that will continue to expand and stuff cuz I think that the music, all of the genres as a whole, is a very expanding thing. I think it should always keep continuing to. I think it's mind-boggling to think what new genre might be. Like even genres that you take the last 15 years and like specific subgenres like trap or something like that. Like what might be the next thing of that in 15 years that everyone is like, wow, that's all its own genre now. That sort of a thing. And I'm very hopeful and optimistic about all of that. In 1918, there was like around the time that when people were recovering from the first pandemic, I think that was when The Rite of Spring was premiered too, and people walked out because it sounded different. It was its own thing, and people wanted something referential around then. People wanted something familiar that they knew and sounded like something they so. But over time, like I think it can be the hardest thing to kind of fearlessly commit to making something that sounds original as opposed to, is just referential to something else and all of that. But, I have a lot of hope for music to continue to do that.
Yeah, whether it's like Stravinsky or whether it's Coltrane, I think people are afraid, or maybe they just don't have the time sometime in today's world to sit down and develop a taste for a new sound that is an acquired taste. Definitely, I feel you on that. All right, so two-time Grammy winner, right?
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, so what was that like? What was the feeling like of having something that you made and put your heart and soul into it? Maybe I don't maybe you had the goal of winning Grammys even early on, like as a teenager. So what was it like having that goal fulfilled twice?
Well, I never really had the goal myself. My mom kind of always wanted that for me. That was something that she always really cared a lot about, and but you know, over time, I would see a lot of my friends would be involved in that, and I always thought it was interesting. The first time I got two nominations was for that album "Lucky to Be Me," and I was living with Dana Stevens at the time. I was living in Oakland for a year, and I woke him up at 8 a.m. I was using the bathroom and I was checking my laptop, and the nominations were announced, and I saw that I was on there twice, and so I started screaming like Dana, and that was a special day. I broke into a nearby someone's backyard, and I had two bottles of champagne and used their trampoline. Just some neighbors that I didn't know. I broke into their yard and got drunk on their trampoline, and called everyone in my phone. I went down the list and I was like, "Hey, what's up with you?" And I'm like jumping and stuff, and it was just such a cool. It was a cool experience, especially that first time. I lost both of those. Lost to John Williams, and yet my 4 minute long tune argument lost to John Williams' score to the movie Munich, back before they had a separate category for like full movie scores and things. And then I also lost to Michael Brecker for best jazz instrumental solo. But it was a cool experience. You know, I got to go, got a medal. You get a nomination medal when you get nominated, and got to go with my mom and a couple good friends and all of that. You know, and that was a cool experience. I didn't really, you know, other than like, you know, I was throughout the years periodically playing on different projects that might get a nomination or win or but you know, that was as far as my own nominations. I was kind of had put it out of my mind. Tree Falls was the first album that I released in like 11 years, so I was like, well, you know, I didn't really possibly think that would. I just wanted that album to be heard by anyone. You know, I was just like happy that people were hearing it. But I do remember just my phone blowing up like in an insane way, where you know, all of a sudden I, you know, look over at my phone, and like within 45 seconds I think I had like 200 texts of people saying congrats, and I was like, what just happened? And then looked it up and went. And at the time too, it was very much in the thick of like, I was by myself, I was out of a relationship, I was you know, when it happened, when I actually got called up to the stage and everything, it felt like deja vu, weirdly, because I think you run through that possible moment in your head a bunch, and so then it's like to me it felt like the closest thing to compare it to just the feeling in the moment was when my mom threw me a surprise birthday party when I was 13, and she gave me a grand piano, because I was like, all these people standing around. I thought it was a prank in a way or something, you know, like where it just didn't. There was something surreal but really familiar about it, and all of that. And then they put you through the ringer for the next hour and a half. You got to go through these crazy interviews and press conferences and all this kind of stuff, and you never go back into that room. And so when Plot Armor got a nomination, I was most excited because I could go with Marta, my now wife, and you know, not be alone within that experience, and that was just, it was just really cool. I think the coolest part about it is that it yeah, you know, there's moments of like Plot Armor. We worked on 71 days in the studio on that one, and it was a lot of hard work, a lot of exhaustion, being tired of the music, being sick of it. And then you can get myopic. It's like when you say the same word over and over and you forget its meaning. You know, if you keep hearing the same damn tunes, the same mixes, all you can hear is like that little problem with that one part or whatever. And, you know, and so it's nice to be able to have experienced that. You know, it's cool. You know, it's something that you carry around for the rest of your life and all that, but ultimately, it's just nice when that kind of thing can happen. It can help career-wise a little bit, but you know, it's less impactful than you might think. You know, it's still the most impactful thing I could do would be making a record that's a tribute to everyone else, a tribute to some very recognizable artist, and then it'd be much easier to just book my group everywhere. But I'm thankful that it happened, and certainly it's, you know, it was, biggest thing was it was an honor being acknowledged with. The most exciting thing about this one was two of my good friends we were up in the same category, like Mark Juliana and Julian Lodge. Julian played on Plot Armor too, so it was just cool that the three of us got in there. And we took down Bela Fleck together. I'm a big Bela Fleck fan, so I was like, it was so cool. It was an honor to get to talk to him a bit that day and all that. And Steve Gadd was up in that category too. So it's just you know, it's fun. And when you're there at the Grammys too, like there's not a real sense of like, it's not really like competing against people. It's just you're all celebrating each other there. And I think there's a lot of camaraderie to that, which is cool. That's a cool feeling where, you know, I think if you get a chance to, where that happens to someone, and it just seems like most of the people that I play with, like you go enough time, like you at least get a nomination and get to go and things like that. And it's a cool experience, you know. but definitely it's never like a goal going into a project and all of that. But you know, you get to day 70 in the studio and you're just so sick of the thing. You know, there's probably, it runs through your head of just like, I hope something like that happens. It's like it's just something to give you a little bit of a nice little gold star afterwards or whatever.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, man. Congrats, and here's to many more, man.
Oh,
Awesome.
thanks.
Yeah, so what do you got planned for 2026? Do you have a New Year's resolution? What are you gonna be working on musically?
Variety of you know, eating healthier kind of shit, but just a lot of shows coming up. More touring, hopefully a lot more touring with my group, and have some new U.S. agents and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I really uh yeah, I mean, it's a pretty full year already in terms of like, I'm just looking this schedule of stuff that I think it'll be a lot of cool stuff. I'll be working on the new album throughout the course of the year, so I hope I can get at least pretty far down the line on that. I'm going to be working on Marta's album as well, and um, yeah, just a lot of different. Yeah, I mean, if you know, hopefully just a lot of hopefully playing in some places I always love it when I'm on a tour and I get to play in a place that I haven't played before, because at this point there's just like, you know, been to a lot of places, and but you know, there was a tour a year or two ago where it was like, okay, something in Estonia. I'd never been to Estonia before, you know, or when places pop up on a tour that I haven't been. I really love that, so I hope there's a lot more of that. And yeah, I'm just fortunate to be able to do it, and yeah, so yeah, resolutions, I don't know, probably just less carbs or something, you know, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm trying to be less nice to people, trying to be more selfish. That's my personal New Year's resolution for
That can be
2020.
very good too. Absolutely. That's a skill that can be hard for nice folks like you know, it's like it could be
Yeah,
really hard to be protective over your own time and energy and all of that, you know.
yeah, definitely. All right, Taylor XD, ladies and gentlemen. Taylor, where can we hear your existing discography and then that new album when it is released? Where will we be able to hear that?
New album will probably be out late 2027, at the latest maybe early 2028. But that'll be, you know, available everywhere. There's a lot of the most recent two albums, Plot Armor and Tree Falls. Um, you can, I think they're available on any kind of streaming platform or any of those kind of things. I've been promised vinyl records for the last two albums and it didn't happen, so I'm just hoping to release this in a situation where they're um uh, that's going to be a priority. So no matter what happens, the next album will also have to be released on vinyl. I'm going to make sure that that happens first, actually, before digital, because otherwise there's just no guarantee it's going to happen. So at least I'm putting it out into the universe on this podcast that I'm trying actively to, because I'm sick of getting these emails like 2 or 3 a week, constantly. People saying like, "Where can I find this vinyl?" and blah blah blah. And I'm like, I don't care anymore. I'm like, you're confusing me for admin. I'm not. I don't do that end of I make the music, so you know. But hopefully, this one could be released on vinyl. It already, there's a couple good tunes on it so far that I'm got a good feeling about it. I have the same feeling about this next one that I did at a certain point on the last two. So, um, yeah, people, it'll be a little while before people can hear those, but until then, hope people come to a gig. TaylorEigsti.com. I always have a list of places where I'm playing and all of that. But yeah, when people can come to live shows, that supports everything. You know, it's an amazing effect that has, especially when people buy tickets early. Then the artists, we get to stop getting emails from a venue concerned about ticket sales and stuff. It's like, just buy them early, people, please. It helps us, you know. So, but yeah, hopefully get to just do a bunch of fun shows and see a lot of good people and keep it going, all that.
All right, sounds good. All right, Taylor, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure having you on.
Yeah, my pleasure.